All right, it's the B Block Podcast. Brandon Scott here with you, and I'm doing this right ahead of the conference finals starting, and I'm really excited about it. It's funny, man, because I've actually talked myself out of my original picks, and that is in part because of some of the new information that we've gotten throughout the course of the last, series or so. I had going into this Oklahoma City being the surest thing. That was something that I said, if not on the last podcast, certainly on the podcast before that, like a previous podcast, perhaps looking ahead at the semifinals. I mentioned right here on this very podcast that I view the Oklahoma City Thunder as the surest thing out of the final 8 of the semifinalists. That's how I viewed it at the time. But based off of how they played against the Nuggets in the semifinals, and based off of how Minnesota, who I also picked to lose against the Golden State Warriors, despite the Warriors losing Steph Curry, I thought that the Warriors would still be able to figure out the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I was wrong about that. So taking in the new information of Minnesota being a team that I was not given enough credit for how they ended the season, for the way that they were playing toward the end of the season. And to their credit, they were one of the hottest, if not the hottest team going in to the playoffs. They had figured things out after really starting off kind of shaky with the Julius Randle adjustment and all of that. But they figured things out. They're probably, makes a case for the hottest team right now in the Western Conference, or going into the playoffs, certainly. And so it is funny for me to kind of go back on this now, from thinking that Oklahoma City was the surest thing to now being in a space of picking the Wolves. I'm picking Minnesota to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in 6 games. And this is a shock to even myself. But here's why, man. Look, I think that Minnesota has the length. Well, first of all, these two teams they were even in the regular season, right? And both of them won on each other's home court. So there's not a lot to take away from just that. But if you just look at the matchup, just look at the basketball matchup, the length that the Timberwolves present, and sort of the physicality that I think that they're able to match with Oklahoma City, and the things that Oklahoma City does well, what has allowed Oklahoma City to be as dominant of a team as they've been throughout the season is something that I think that Minnesota can match up well with their length, and even what's turned out to be the depth of their roster. So I feel like they match up well physically and athletically with their length. And of course, when you look at the other side, of course, there's Anthony Edwards. The Anthony Edwards factor is one that, like, it is just hard to ignore. Of course, on the other end, you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but Anthony Edwards has a quality about him. But on top of that, Julius Randle, as I think so far, I feel like it's clear that Minnesota has unlocked something in Julius Randle that we have not seen quite from him before, where he's a scorer, but he's also affecting the game in other ways. He looks like a more well-rounded player, and just a more high quality, high value player. And so the Julius Randle that you're getting in these conference finals, to me, feels like a different Julius Randle than the one that we have talked about, or the one that we've kind of associated him as being, kind of like this high volume scorer that isn't necessarily a winner, and probably unfairly tagged with that. But certainly the way that he's performed in these playoffs makes you feel differently about him. And so I feel a lot better about the Julius Randle and the Julius Randle element, but of course the Anthony Edwards-Randle tandem versus, let's say, this SGA and Jalen Williams thing. Like, Jalen Wood, the J Dub as they call him, is for me gotta be. And look, he's capable of doing what he did in, was it game 3 of whichever big game that he had against against the Nuggets, where he was incredible, and then after that, he kind of just falls off the face of the earth. And I don't see it's tough knowing that the second best player on what's supposed to be the best team in the Western Conference has that in him. And I don't see that in Julius Randle. I don't see that in obviously in Anthony Edwards and in Minnesota overall. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm picking the Wolves in 6 over the Thunder, but obviously the Thunder, having been the best team in the league all year, is the favorite, and home court advantage and all of that, MVP and all of that. So I, I mean, I'm looking at this as a somewhat against the grain pick, but I'm kind of going with my gut here and what I've seen and what I've watched from both of these teams. Now, a couple of cool things that I am watching out for. I mentioned Julius Randle. I think it's cool that he gets to kind of be on this stage, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and SGA. I think it's cool to have, like, they're not like distant cousins or play cousins or like they made that up. Like, they're actual first cousins who have clearly grown up together and have been close. They talk about being basically like brothers from what it sounds like. Their parents are siblings and the siblings are close, and so they raise their children close. And so for them to be in a conference finals against each other, it's almost kind of like watching brothers play in the conference finals against each other. It's really close to that. So I think that part of it is cool. Obviously, SGA, the much more high profile player, but I mean, I would mention Nickeil Alexander Walker is an important part of what they do. I think on both ends of the floor. Just I talked about their length and their physicality and how they can kind of muck it up a little bit for OKC and sort of what they like to do. Now it's going to be interesting to see how the series is called, though, because I feel like the refs have allowed the playoffs to be fairly physical enough, but so much of what the Thunder, so much of what they do is predicated. I always try to figure out, do I want to say so much of what the Thunder, what it does? But anyway, it's so much of it is predicated on, like with SGA, getting you, being physical with you on one end, but then getting you to be physical enough with them so they could get to the line and get easy shots. And, you know, uh, they like to shoot threes and free throws, efficiency. So, it'll be interesting to see how the series is called. One thing that's dope about this is, like, I feel like Chris Finch, y'all check it out, man. Y'all tell me if I'm tripping on this, but I feel like Chris Finch don't have a whole lot of respect for the what some of us call the insurance fraud. Like, I think James Harden was one of the initial ones to make insurance fraud as a basketball concept pretty popular, where you're out there doing the bait and switch to get the foul calls. I think Dwayne Wade was somebody that did a little bit of it, but James Harden is one that really made it popular, and I think you see it now with Luka, and really more than anybody. I think LeBron does it a little bit, and he might just be more of a flopper. But more than anybody with the insurance fraud, the most fraudulent on the insurance fraud front is SGA, and it feels like Chris Finch, from what I can tell, does not have a whole lot of love for how they, like. I mean, you can go back and look how, in the past, Chris Finch has called out how the refs don't let you touch SGA. I wonder what kind of pressure is going to be put on the officiating in, allowing Minnesota to be physical, as I point out that they like to be. So that'll be interesting. I wonder also how much zone is Minnesota gonna play in this series, considering the struggles that Oklahoma City has had at various times to shoot the basketball. Like, that's a big thing. Like, you talk about how well-rounded the Thunder is, or however you want to put it, but they have shown times where they can go through their own real critical offensive lows, and I think it's something that also worked for Minnesota at some point earlier in the season when they played each other in the regular season, going zone, and I think that it even helped them overcome like a 20-something point lead against the Thunder earlier in the season, and that was a big part of what disrupted their rhythm. And I think that's something that they can tap back into. And I like to see how much of that we're going to actually see in this series, and whether Oklahoma City is going to struggle to shoot the ball um, in man or zone, honestly, because they've shown that's a thing that can happen with them. So I have completely flip flopped based off of, so going into the semifinals, I had Oklahoma City as the surest thing, and I had Minnesota even after game one. And, after Steph Curry was injured with the hammy, I had them still losing the Golden State, right? I have now flipped based off of how the semifinals went, based off of how Oklahoma City at times struggled offensively against Denver, and based off of what I saw and how I basically saw Minnesota perform in a fairly dominant fashion that was consistent with how they've honestly played for the latter part of the regular season. It's got me flipped over, picking the Wolves over the Thunder in 6. This might be another surprise. And look, I'm going to be real with y'all. I'm saying this with a lot less confidence than I am with the Wolves, because there is something about this Knicks energy that I cannot separate from, that like I just can't get enough of it. The idea that the Knicks could possibly go to the finals, let alone possibly win the finals. Um, I, it, it, I'm not a Knicks fan, but I'm a basketball fan, and I'm a fan of like a ratchet time. And I think the Knicks winning the NBA finals would be, even going to the NBA finals after, like, I don't think they've been since that 99 year, right? Let me do this in my head because I know everyone. Da 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 da. No, they have not. So to go back to the NBA Finals for the first time in over 25 years would be amazing for Knicks fans, and I think for the basketball community at large. But this is another one of those where I got to separate the narrative a little bit from the actual basketball matchup, which, similar to with Minnesota against Oklahoma City, I like the matchup for Indiana. I feel like this one is in their favor as much as I want to lean into these possibilities with the Knicks. Like, the Knicks to me are the top heavy team with probably the stars that I trust the most. Even, and look, that's not a shot at Hallie, because Tyrese Halliburton has had some moments in these playoffs. I want to say that. But Jalen Brunson, and then like, Cat. So Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns has turned out to be like a tandem that I can really get behind and believe in. Mikal Bridges as your third best player, and Josh Hart as a guy that comes in there and does everything for you. I just like, I love what their team looks like and what it represents. Never mind even to think about Mitchell Robinson. Like don't even go there, right? And like what he can possibly provide to you, or provide for you from a backup center standpoint, which I think, I think they're winning. They have a chance to win some bench minutes because of Mitchell Robinson, despite the fact that Indiana is the deeper team. But that is also part of the reason why I'm going with Indiana over the Knicks. The Knicks are more top heavy, and I think Indiana just has the better overall top to bottom roster. Now, this is the same type of logic that had me picking the Rockets over the Golden State Warriors, and we saw how that turned out. But I think that was more of a matter of, one team being experienced and knowing how to play versus another one not being experienced and still learning how to play. These two teams, I think, are much more evenly matched in terms of, like, I think in terms of physical matchup and in terms of readiness for this moment. So I cannot wait to watch. And I say Pacers over the Knicks in 6. I got both of these ending in 6. I'd love for them to both go 7 and my predictions still be correct. I'm gonna root for my predictions. I'm just gonna say that. If that's lame, forgive me, but I am gonna root for them. But look, I don't have I don't have any problem with these series going 7. I prefer it. And of course, the Knicks, man, like I've been talking about for a while now, they could win, man. They could really win. It is so cool to be in this position, to be able to watch the Knicks actually be good, because unlike a lot of people who are annoyed by Knicks fans, I find it just comical and hilarious because I can shut it off at any point. I can stop watching and following it and consuming it at any point. So whenever I shut it on or whenever I turn it on and the Knicks fans are out here wilding, whether they're terrible or good, like it's pretty entertaining. So yeah, watching them celebrate and watching them, actually have some validity to their arrogance is hilarious to me. But I think it ends here. I think it ends here, man. Tyrese Halliburton has been an incredible playoff performer. I think what you've gotten from Aaron Nesmith. I think the Miles Turner. Oh, I mentioned Pascal Siakam, of course. The Miles Turner and Cat matchup, I think, kind of cancels itself out a little bit. And that's not to say the Cat's not going to have an impact on the series because of that. I think it, or that either one of them is not going to have an impact on the series. I just think that they match up pretty well, and for the most part, you're going to get probably something close to similar. But that's unless I think Cat has an extra gear and a little extra bit of ability offensively. That's unless you get some legendary Cat moments in these Eastern Conference Finals, which I think is totally possible. But I'm predicting that to be mostly a wash. Look, I like the Knicks stars and what they got sort of on the top end over what the Pacers necessarily have, but the depth of their team, I think, is a big deal. Tibbs rides his starters a little bit more than, and perhaps that's just because he has to, but rides like his key 7 guys or whatever it is more than more than the Pacers do, and I think also stylistically it'll be interesting to see because and that's why this is a little bit of a rogue pick, because I think in the playoffs you want to normally go with the team that can slow it down and is better and more methodical in the half court and can kind of just more reliable and going to their, getting to their spot and getting their shot and getting the right guy the ball and that sort of thing. And the Knicks are actually probably, I would say the Knicks are probably that team. They're probably that team out of these two. And whereas the Pacers feel like more like, not to be not to be a nerd, but sort of true to their name. They want to pick up the pace. They want to kind of run a little bit more and get out in transition and they do a good job with shooting threes and all of that kind of thing, or have done a good job in these playoffs shooting threes and that sort of thing. So that's been more so their identity. Of course, they got Hallie out there, who's an incredible shooter, and if he's hot or if he's having a moment, that can be pretty scary. Like we have seen that he can be a scary playoff performer. I think people are having to kind of respect him a lot more than maybe they used to, but or even want to. But I think that element of it is real, and then also like I think Indiana wants to play that style, but they can also slow it down if they need to. Like we've seen that if they need to slow it down and Hallie needs to get him a bucket, or I think if Pascal Siakam needs to get him a bucket, I think that Nesmith has improved as an offensive player, even though I'd rather have the ball in one of those other guys' hands if I really need a bucket. Like they are a they are I think a danger. Like, okay, so let's just say this. I'm picking the Pacers over the Knicks in 6, but we would all, I think, like to see it be like Wolves and Knicks, considering that trade. That would be cool if we could get a Wolves Knicks finals, considering that trade, and that'd be like the biggest win-win trade of all time. These two teams who weren't in the finals the previous year make a trade and both make it to the finals the year after they make the trade or the subsequent year for making the trade. Like That would be dope. Part of me is a little bit rooting for that. But man, I can't shake the Pacers, man. And maybe if I wanted to even simplify it more, I could say that the Pacers walking down an injured, mostly often injured Cleveland squad was more impressive to me than the Knicks coming from behind against a Boston squad that at times beat itself and then eventually lost its best player. Right, like you think back, the Celtics shot themselves out of that first game. Okay, they were up and then they just couldn't stop shooting threes and just slowly allowed these cats to come back, the Knicks to come back, and then they didn't. It wasn't quite like that in game two, which kind of had me with the side eye, like, okay, this is serious. This is not a fluke. But they had their moments where I think the Celtics beat themselves, and of course they lost their best player. I was as happy as I am for the Knicks, and as happy as I am to watch the Knicks be relevant again. I am less impressed by what they have done as I am by what Indiana's done and what Indiana did against. I understand an injured Cleveland Cavs team, but those guys ended up coming back, and Indiana still ended up handling business. And they've just got some traits, man. They got some traits. They're clutch. They play on both ends. They shoot threes. They're deep, and I think deeper than the Knicks. And so I'm feeling pretty good about Pacers over Knicks in 6, and then I mentioned earlier Wolves over Thunder in 6. And so we'll see how it plays out. Right now that's a Minnesota Indiana finals that I'm predicting. I ain't willing to go too much further past that, but we'll see. We'll see what it looks like by the time we get through it. If I could jump back local real quick though on the Astros. Look, I realize I don't know if I've done any Astros since I joined Foolish Club. And I couldn't even tell you the last time we did an Astros thing on the B Block podcast. But now that we're well into May, and of course the Rockets have been out of the playoffs for a while, and pretty soon the conference finals and the finals itself will be over with, and my time won't be as consumed with that as it has been. Look, a lot has changed for me workflow wise in terms of how often I'm in the clubhouse, and how often I'm at the games, and just the capacity in which I'm working that beat or not. It's probably a better way to put it. I'm not a seasoned credential reporter this year the way I have been in previous years. Not really in the clubhouse. I'm kind of consuming this season as a fan, honestly. And I don't mind it. I think for what my role is professionally, and obviously what my standing is as a native Houstonian and lifelong Astros fan, I think it's perfectly fine to live in that space. And so, with that being said, I'm having to find things to make me excited. I'm having to find things to make me optimistic, because the reality is I look at the Astros as one of the teams that they are just among, I think, a handful of like, honestly, I think there's 30 MLB teams. I think probably half of them right now have a legitimate chance of winning the World Series. I think at least half of them, if not more. That's where I think Major League Baseball is at right now. If you want to pull up the Major League Baseball standings, I could go through it with you. I'm not going to do that right now on the podcast, but I could go through it with you and make a case for no less than 15 teams of having of at least being able to state a case for going to the World Series, which by extension means that you could win it. So the Astros, I think, to their credit, are one of those teams that I would mention, one of those teams that I would talk about, but they just don't stand out among that group at all, other than being the Astros, other than being a team that has been there, sort of living off their name. The Astros are living off their name this year, I think, more than they ever have. But the Jake Meyers thing, I will not allow you or anybody to kill my joy about the Astros center fielder finally looking like the center fielder that they saw him being and that they kind of sold him as being, I thought, or at least early on. Like, I thought that Jake Meyers was supposed to be the future. We knew that he had to kind of figure it out at the plate, but that he'd have a little bit of pop, and that, the defense would eventually be like Gold Glove type, all-star level type of defense, and we'll see what the bat looks like eventually. And then he gets hurt in the 2021 postseason, I believe it is, against the White Sox, catching the ball in center field, and tears either the labrum or the shoulder. Has a shoulder issue. And I remember this back in 2021, and it is never quite right after that, or never quite seems like he gets back to what it was that he was on the trajectory of being, or at least what they thought he could be. And right now, I was talking about this in the loop earlier in the day with John Lopez and Reginald Atatula and Figgy Fig. I do that every Tuesday from 11 a.m. to noon. And I was mentioning to them how Jake Meyers quietly, midway or into late May, is no worse than the second or third best center fielder, all around center fielder in baseball. Like, he is top 2 or 3. He is top 3 in both F WAR, wins above replacement, and outs above average on the defensive side. Like, so F WAR among qualified center fielders, the third, I believe, most valuable center fielder out there. I think 1 and 2 might be Pete Crow Armstrong, and from what I could tell, Byron Buxton is injured, so I'll even take him out of the equation right now. Like, other than Pete Crow Armstrong for the Cubs, you can't find a better all-around center fielder right now in the game than Jake Meyers. So I think he's making an early all-star case. Certainly, he's got to keep this up. And we had a listener point out on Sports Radio 610 on Tuesday that Jake Meyers has had a good and successful May before, and this could turn out to just be what Jake Meyers is in May. Can he survive the grind of the season, or give you the consistency that you are actually asking for from your center fielder? Time will tell. But right now, I feel like you're seeing some things from Jake that feel sustainable, that feel like he has improved his whole moxie and approach at the plate. Like, he feels like a much more confident player. Not to mention, again, he's been giving you Gold Glove center field for a while. I feel like he's been giving you Gold Glove level center field for a while. It was just the fact that he couldn't hit his way out of a paper bag that was so damn frustrating. But not the case. No longer the case with Jake Meyers. He is now in a spot where, who would have thunk that? Like, I think we were expecting the Astros at least could take a step back, given the attrition, given the players that they've lost over the years. But who would have thought going into this year that their best players would be, that you could argue their best players, non-pitching, their best position players could be Jake Meyers and Jeremy Pena. We're talking about that too on the radio. Like, Jake Meyers and Jeremy Pena turned one of them being a dude that I feel like had a lot to prove in Meyers, and then Pena is somebody who I don't think as much had to prove, because he has been good enough, I think, to just like kind of be worthy of like respect of, hey, this is their shortstop. This is the Astros shortstop, right? World Series MVP, and then the defense for the most part that he's giving you ever since then. But it's like, man, it feels like there's still some meat on the bone there. It feels like something is missing. It feels like there is some kind of talent that Jeremy Pena hasn't necessarily tapped into quite yet. And so you think about it, and like those two guys being their more, consistent guys this year, and not necessarily getting as much from Jose Altuve lately. And that's another thing that they got to figure out is how do they tap into, like, the month of May. Jose Altuve has been the inverse of the month of May Jake Meyers. Like, if you were to just kind of look at the numbers, you would think that the one was the other. So they got to figure that part out. And I know earlier in the week they tried to put Jose, in the 3 spot to see if that could spark something. It did not. It did not. But they still won the game. I know I have not talked a lot of Astros, but I definitely want to, like, for example, what's going on with Yordan's hand? Anybody got anything on that? Like, I am starting to get, as an Astros fan, as somebody that I feel like can talk about this in a little bit more of a subjective way and from just a point of passion and, like, care. I don't necessarily have to be as rational and reason about this. I am deeply concerned with this Yordan Alvarez hand injury. And maybe it wouldn't be so if this wasn't something that Yordan dealt with a few years ago. But, like, the fact that it is taking him to the IL, and the fact that he's been eligible to come back from the IL for a while now and is talking about how he still can't swing the bat without pain, still just hitting off a tee, that doesn't feel like he's exactly close. And it makes me question exactly what is wrong here. Like, when we talk about a hand injury or hand soreness or hand inflammation, I know we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of the medicals, but I would like to know, I would like to feel a little bit more informed on what exactly it is that we're talking about, because I'm in a different space now. Like, in 2022, I was willing to joke about how, man, the dude hit the ball so damn hard that his hands hurt, and how cool that sound, and then they go on to win the World Series, and he has big postseason moments, big World Series moment, and all is forgotten and all is well. And then you go into spring training the next year, and it comes up again. Yordan Alvarez's hands hurt. He's got hand soreness or hand inflammation or just pain in his hands, and it's a serious issue, obviously, because like, we don't necessarily think about it much, but I'm like, it's one of those things. I guess your hands you take for granted, right? Probably the hands you take, like, of course his hands are okay, but no, it's an issue. So yeah, man, I'm trying to figure out exactly what the hell is going on there and how bad that is. I have no clue, no idea, but it's something that I wish that they would be a little bit more transparent about. And honestly, just from a fan standpoint, something I'm rooting for to not be as bad as it seems when this is what you get, an extended IL stint with a history of hand soreness. All right, before I get out of here, I don't think that I didn't do a Texans schedule episode, and I'll apologize now for missing y'all last Thursday, man. I'm not gonna make no excuses for it, but it just didn't have it Thursday. Did have it on the radio, wasn't able to get it to you for the podcast, but I did do my picks. Let's see, do I have talk about not having it? I wonder if I have I don't. I don't have those exact picks. I would have shared them with you right now. The exact picks that I made with Lopez, but it came out to a 10-7 record, and it came out to a fairly comfortable 10-7 record for the Texans schedule, because I got them getting the 10 before the final game of the season. That not being a game that they necessarily need to win the division, because I think 10 wins will win the division. And so they'll lose that last game, is what I'm predicting. They could very well win it and go 11-6, and it'd be a little bit different. But the way I played it out, Texans go 10-7 again. And I gotta say, like, I don't know if this is me now getting greedy or if this is a good sign that you're just holding a higher standard and a higher expectation. But picking them to go 10-7, picking the Texans to go 10-7 and win the division again is dead ass boring. Like, good for them for being the most impressive team in an unimpressive division. And good for them for finding their head coach quarterback combination, even if they haven't necessarily figured it out on the offensive side with their offensive coordinator. And hopefully Nick Haley is good for them. But good for them that it's been going good so far. Like, so far, so good. But I got them going 10-7 this year and don't really feel particularly confident that this team has a higher ceiling than, let's say, the two previous teams before them. And in fact, if I were to just like look at it, obviously no games have been played, so this is a flawed exercise, but I'm gonna participate in it anyway. If I were to just look at this team versus last year's team versus the rookie year Stroud, the first year with DeMeco Ryans, and if I were to compare the three, I would probably have last year's team is better than this one. And then this year's team is probably only better than the rookie team because some of the guys that were rookies on that team are now in their third year. And being in your third year tends to make you a better football player, makes you a better NFL player. So I make that point to say it is disappointing to go into year three of this and not feel like this team is noticeably better. Like last year was encouraging because it felt like they really leveled up and that team was noticeably better than the team before it. Now, did things work out that way? No, not necessarily. I think on the defensive side, it kind of did. But overall, did it work out that way? No, not necessarily. Of course, Stephon Diggs got hurt early. Of course, Tank Dell got hurt. Nico Collins had a stretch where he was hurt. There was some injury. There were some injuries with even with Joe Mixon. Like there was some mixing and matching of some of their best players, and not all of them getting to play together as much as they ideally would have. But so that I think contributed to them not necessarily being the team that you wanted them to be or thought they could have been. But it did at least feel like they had leveled up and put together a team that was better than the one that they had put together the year before. It does not necessarily feel like that going into this season. That part is a disappointment. But that being said, I still got the Texans going 10-7. I still got them winning the AFC South. I do have the AFC South being a little bit better and scrappier, but I've also said that before. And the AFC South has still kind of been the AFC South. So who knows? We'll see. I'm intrigued by it. I do want to I do want to point out that season opener against the Rams is one that I feel like your boy has got to just circle on the calendar. And honestly, I've been looking at it already. That's one that I got a hard time thinking I'm not gonna be in the building for that because honestly, I've missed this a little bit. I've never been to LA. I'm gonna be 36 years old probably by the time this thing publishes. It's my boy's birthday, and I've never been to Los Angeles. I'm taking my ass to LA for the Texans season opener against the Los Angeles Rams, and I'm hoping they can prove me wrong and get that win. Because I'm skeptical. I'm a little skeptical, but yeah, man. This one has been fun. Make sure that you are subscribed to the B Block Podcast, wherever it is you get your podcast. I want to shout out Foolish Club Media for the partnership, and make sure you are tapped into whatever it is that they are doing. We do this thing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the B Block Podcast. I'm Brandon Scott. Appreciate you for being here again. And until next time, y'all be good.